Really useful engines. Stop thief! Thomas stood at Farquhar, the top station of his branch line. He had brought round Annie and Clarabel after the morning journey and was enjoying a short rest before the run back down the valley. His driver and fireman stood beside his cab talking to the guard who had brought startling news. "Did you know that the station master was burgled last night?" the guard was asking. Thomas's driver shook his head. "You don't say," he exclaimed. "I didn't know he had anything that would be worth stealing." "He's won cups for gardening," explained the fireman. "All taken, and then the scoundrels had the cheek to pinch his car to carry them away in." "Not the new one he's so proud of," said the driver. The guard nodded, and at that moment the signal rose to show that the line was clear. The driver and fireman climbed into Thomas's cab. The guard blew his whistle, waved his green flag, and got into Clarabel as Thomas set off. By the time they were through the tunnel, the train was running nicely. Road and railway were beside each other here, with only a stream between them. Thomas remembered his race with Bertie the bus. He had only won because he could go through the hill, while Bertie had to follow the road over the top. A flash of colour on the road ahead caught his eye. He tried to go faster, to look more closely. "Steady, Thomas," said his driver. "There's plenty of time." "Can't we get closer to that car?" panted Thomas. "It looks like the station master's car to me." "Lots of cars look like that," laughed his driver, but he opened the regulator and they began to draw level. There were two men in the car. They waved when they saw Thomas and tried to go faster. "That's the car all right, Thomas," said the fireman, "and those two must be the thieves. But we can't stop them, and they'll be gone long before the next station. We need pencil, paper, and something to put a note in," said the driver. "We'll throw a message out at the next signal box." Quickly he wrote the note, and they put it in the fireman's empty lunch tin. Then, drawing ahead of the car, Thomas whistled to attract the signalman's attention. They slowed down so that the fireman could throw the box up to him, and as they went past, both the driver and the fireman shouted, "Police!" at the top of their voices. By now the stolen car had gone well ahead, and Thomas did not see it again. But the signalman telephoned police headquarters at once, and the thieves were stopped at a roadblock about 10 miles further on. That afternoon the Fat Controller travelled in Annie and Clarabel to Farquhar. When he got there, he and the station master climbed onto a porter's trolley. They told the passengers the whole story, and the station master thanked Thomas, his driver and his fireman for their prompt action. Passengers cheered loudly, and they cheered even more when they heard that the station master's gardening cups had all been found undamaged in a sack in the boot of the car. "A long time ago," said the Fat Controller, holding up his hand for silence, "Thomas showed how valuable he is to the smooth running of my railway. I am sure you will all agree that today he has once again proved himself to be a really useful engine. Mind that bike." Percy had never known Tom Tipper to be anything but cheerful. Tom was the postman at Farquhar, and every morning he would have a cheery word for Percy as he helped to load the mailbags onto the train. Percy then took them down to the town where there was a big office for sorting the letters. But one morning Tom wasn't there. A postman they didn't know just dumped the bags on the platform and cycled off without stopping to help. "What's happened to Tom?" wondered Percy's driver. "And his old van," added the fireman. "No wonder the new chap looks fed up. Carrying mailbags on a bike would make anyone glum." Tom was soon back, but without his van. During his illness, it had been decided that the van was too expensive to run. Poor Tom was no longer cheerful, and now he had no time to help load the train. "I wish I could cheer him up," sighed Percy the small engine. One day, a man from the station office came to tell Tom that some papers needed signing. "Oh dear," he said anxiously, "this is going to make me very late." He asked Percy to keep an eye on his bicycle while he was gone, and propped it carefully against the fence near the platform ramp. He was gone a long time, and had not returned when Percy was ready to go. Some boys were playing on the platform, and Percy was worried. "Sorry, Percy," said his driver. "We must be off. Time and the Fat Controller wait for no man." In the flurry of starting, no one noticed that one of the boys had picked up Tom's bicycle. He pedalled too far along the platform, and before he could stop, ran out of control down the ramp. He reached the bottom just as Percy started away. Fortunately, the boy fell clear just in time, but the bicycle swerved beneath Percy's wheels and disappeared with a crunch. Percy's driver quickly stopped the train. They extracted the remains, but the red bicycle was beyond repair. Tom came running, and he, the driver, the station master and the guard all told the boys what bad boys they were. "I'm sorry, Mr. Tipper," apologised Percy. "Never mind, Percy," said Tom. "It wasn't your fault, and I never liked that bike much anyway." When the Fat Controller heard about the accident, he ordered that Tom should be given a new bicycle at once. But the next morning, when Percy arrived at Farquhar, he saw a brand new red van standing in the yard, beside the ruins of the bicycle. Close by stood Tom Tipper, beaming from ear to ear. "That accident did me a good turn, Percy," he smiled, "and now my chief has decided to let me have a new van after all." "So I did help," said Percy to himself when Tom had gone. "By accident, as you might say." Fish. The fishermen who used the port near the big station were bringing in more fish than ever before. Each day, the sheds on the quayside were piled high with boxes. Much of this extra fish had to travel by rail, so the trains which Henry and the other engines had to pull became heavier. One night, a special load of fish was ordered, and the Fat Controller decided that extra vans must be added to the train that the men called the Flying Kipper. The only spare vans that they could find were old ones that had been standing unused on a siding for some time. Workmen soon cleaned them, and they were added to the end of the train. Henry grumbled about it, but there was nothing to be done. "You'll just have to put up with it, Henry," said his driver. "At least the extra load will mean we can have another engine help us up Gordon's Hill." Duck often waited at Edward Station so that he could help heavy trains by pushing them from behind. Night, Henry made progress in spite of his extra load. When they reached Edward Station, his driver stopped the train beyond the platform. Then, using Henry's whistle, he gave the special signal that meant he wanted help getting up the hill. "Beep, beep, beep, beep," whistled Henry. "I need a banker, please." "Beep, beep," replied Duck. "I shan't be long." Duck buffered gently up to Henry's train. He was not coupled on, so Henry could run on without stopping when they reached the top of the hill. "Ready," Duck whistled. push hard, puffed Henry. We're doing it, replied Duck. Henry was pulling harder than he thought he was. It was a dark night, and Duck felt the weight on his buffer slacken. Because of the dark, he could not see that Henry had taken the train on his own and was slowly drawing ahead. All trains carry a red lamp on the final vehicle to show that the train is complete. This is called a tail lamp. Duck's driver began to get worried. "There's no sign of a tail lamp," he said, "but we must keep going." Duck whistled, but there was no reply from Henry. Henry, meanwhile, was going well, but his train seemed to be getting heavier. He had to keep moving, but he could not avoid slowing down. Suddenly, from behind him, there was a splintering crash. Duck's front bent and pieces of broken wood began to fall on him, one of them denting his funnel. He stopped quickly, and Henry, feeling the joint, stopped too, just beyond the top of the hill. Over Gordon's Hill, a strong smell of fish hung in the air. By the light of torches, the drivers and firemen tried to work out what had happened, while the guard ran back down the hill to warn the signalman. When daylight came, it was all too obvious. The lamp iron on the old van, which should have been the tail lamp, had broken, and the lamp had fallen off at the bottom of the hill. The van had been invisible in the darkness. "Your fault," said the Fat Controller. "That lamp iron should have been checked. Don't worry, we'll soon have your funnel and front straightened out." "Thank you, sir," said Duck sadly. "Thomas told me once to be careful about fish. He was right, sir, wasn't he?" Triple header. Gordon was resting in a siding. It was a hot day, and the express had been heavy. "I get so out of breath," he complained, "but nobody cares. They just say I'll be all right after a rest." "Get the Fat Controller to give you tanks and a bunker," suggested Thomas cheekily. "You'll feel like a new engine. We tank engines never get out of breath, you know." Perhaps it was lucky for Thomas that poor Gordon hadn't the energy to make any reply. The men worked hard on Gordon, but they couldn't make him better. "You need new tubes, Gordon," they said. "You'll have to go to the works to have them fitted." While Gordon was being mended, Henry pulled the express. But one morning, just before Gordon was due back, Henry was ill too. "We've no spare engine except Thomas," the inspector told the Fat Controller, "but he can't pull the train on his own." "Could Percy help?" asked the Fat Controller. The inspector shook his head. "Two of them with Duck might manage," he suggested. "It's only as far as the works. They're sure to have a spare engine there." So the 3 tank engines were coupled together. Thomas nearest the train, Duck in the middle and Percy in front. Then slowly they started. Come on," fussed Percy importantly. We're doing it," puffed Duck. Pull harder, grumbled Thomas to the others. The heavy train drew out of the platform. The engines couldn't go as fast as Gordon, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew that Percy, Thomas and Duck were doing their best. Expresses are not like branch line trains. They don't stop at all the little stations, and the engines don't have a chance to get their breath back. Soon the 3 began to feel very tired. They struggled valiantly up Gordon's hill, but the strain was beginning to show. "I'm glad we didn't stick there," thought Thomas. "Gordon would never let us hear the last of it." The hill proved too much for Percy. His driver blew the whistle and stopped the train. "We can't take you off, Percy," said Thomas's driver. "Do the best you can to keep your brakes off. It's not far." This made things harder for the other 2, but they struggled on gamely. Twin columns of steam shooting high into the air. We're nearly there, puffed Thomas and Duck together as they summoned a last brave effort. Poor Percy had no steam left to say anything. They were just passing the works when Duck found he could go no further. Thomas could not pull the heavy train on his own, and the cavalcade came to a standstill, a few yards short of the station platform, and there, watching from the works siding, stood Gordon. The Fat Controller, who had been on the train, told the 3 engines he was very proud of them. "You did very well to get so far," he said, "and now you deserve a rest." Percy and Thomas were uncoupled, and a new engine took their place. As the tank engines moved wearily away, Gordon looked at Thomas and smiled. Then he took 3 deep breaths and winked. He didn't need to say anything. Thomas knew exactly what he meant. James and the diesel engines. Old stuck-up. The Fat Controller preferred steam engines on his railway, but he found diesels useful because they could pull either coaches or trucks. "You're versatile," he would say to them. "Real mixed traffic engines." Boko and Bear were proud of this, but James was not impressed. He liked these 2 diesels, but he treated all others with deep suspicion. "Diesels don't use coal and water," he would say darkly. "How can you trust an engine who isn't normal in his habits?" Visiting diesels sometimes boasted about how special they were. Usually Boko and Bear had to spend the next day smoothing ruffled feelings. One day a particularly haughty diesel came from the other railway. When the visitor found that he was to share the shed with steam engines, he stopped outside in disgust and refused to go any further. "Why on earth does your controller keep such out-of-date objects?" he growled rudely. "Dirty, smoky, slow things. Ugh!" He shuddered delicately. "On our railway," Diesel continued loftily, "steam engines are kept strictly in their place and not allowed on the main line without special permission." Boko, who was showing the diesel round, lost patience. "Stay outside then if you're so proud about it," he said crossly. "I'm going to join my friends." I hope it's cold tonight, and he can't start in the morning, snorted James. At least someone might want to preserve us. Who'd need him? Old Stuck-up! The engines were glad when morning came. They went to fetch their trains as early as they could, and the visitor was left alone. That's better, he purred to himself. How can an engine rest in all that hissing and clanking? Cleaning equipment and fuel supply were in the part of the shed that Boko and Bear had shared. Old Stuck-up was so full of self-importance that he had forgotten he would need cleaning and refueling before he went home. It was getting late when he remembered. The shed is empty, he thought. If I go now, no one will know I've been. He scuttled forward quickly. Too quickly. The rails where Bear and Boko had stood were oily, and when the visitor tried to stop, he couldn't. Brake blocks and buffers, I'm slipping, he wailed, as his wheels locked and slivered. He shut his eyes as with a despairing whoop of horror, he crashed into the wall at the end of the shed. The diesel was not badly damaged, but a dreadful draught came through the hole in the wall. When the other engines came home, they heard the story from Douglas, who had cleared up the mess. Ho, 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 chortled Henry. Old Stuck-up came unstuck, did he? I say, Boko, what is it the Fat Controller calls you? Versatile, chuckled Boko, but that isn't what he called Stuck-up. I couldn't hear all he said, but I don't think it sounded very polite. Crossed lines. Most of the Fat Controller's engines accepted diesels. James had never liked them. They're all right, said Henry. Just mixed traffic engines like you and me. Mixed up engines, you mean? James grunted. With windows at each end, how can they know if they're coming or going? Toby has 2 cabs, remarked Duck, and he gets on all right. Toby's just a little engine, scoffed James. If an important engine like me didn't know which way to turn, what would the railway come to? All the engines agreed that James was becoming much too puffed up in his smoke box. Making out he's royalty or something, grumbled Henry. It's disgusting. I know an engine called King James, remarked Duck. In the old days at Paddington, King James I he was, but he didn't swank about like that. Uck, dinna be telling James that, pleaded Donald. It's even more the misery he'll be making out of lives. Exactly, agreed Henry. Who's going to trim his wheels for him? The engines tried all sorts of ideas. Nothing worked. James grew so conceited that the others were glad when he was away. Even the coaches twittered anxiously to each other if they thought he was going to pull them. One day James came to the shed, fuming with rage. Shunting, he snorted. Where are Donald and Douglas? They should be here for jobs like that. But the twins were helping on Edward's branch line, so James had to do the work himself. James's train had long trucks called well wagons. These have bogie wheels at each end, with a low section between them. They are used to carry cars, tractors, and other heavy machinery. The shunting should have been easy, but James was crossed and bumped the trucks. Oh, 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 they cried. Some of them slipped their brakes on to spite James. Weather was damp and misty too, so the shunting took a long time. At last, James had only 2 trucks to fetch before his train was ready. Because of the mist, the signalman sometimes found it hard to see what was happening. James's driver told him that James would whistle when they had collected all the trucks and were clear of the points. They had almost finished when suddenly James heard a sharp peep peep from another engine close by. The signalman heard it too and thought it was James saying he was ready. He pulled the lever, setting the points for the main line. But James wasn't ready. The points changed when one of the trucks was halfway over them. One bogie went the right way, but the other was diverted towards the main line. Before James realised it, the truck was travelling sideways between the 2 lines. A signal stood right in its path. Stop! Squealed the truck, but it was too late. The signal toppled to the ground with a crash, just missing James. That's torn it, said James's driver. The Fat Controller isn't going to like this. And he didn't. He spoke severely about it, because the signal was important and its loss was very inconvenient. James knew the accident was not his fault, but he was unusually quiet in the shed that evening. The others were relieved. "Suppose it might be difficult to know which way to go when you've got two cabs," whispered a voice. "But to go two ways at once, with only one cab, that really is something." James pretended he hadn't heard. Fire engine. "Flying Scotsman and my brothers were all green," explained Gordon one night in the shed. "It was all very well in its way, but now I prefer my blue. It makes me different, you see, and that's very suitable for an important engine like me." "The engines on all our line used to be blue," remembered Donald, "but nae sae dark as we are. Dougie and me never were though, as we had to be black, as blue makes a nice change." "I like my green too," agreed Henry. "I'd hate to be red like James. People would think I was a fire engine." "At least people can see me coming," retorted James. "I don't disappear into the background like some engines I could mention. If it weren't for the noise, you'd need a yellow and black front like Mavis." Henry's protests were drowned in the laughter of the other engines, and he went to sleep wondering how to pay James back. Henry was still cross the next morning. "What can be wrong? What can be wrong?" asked the coachers anxiously as Henry pulled noisily away from the big station. Do come along, Henry snorted impatiently. They had a fast run, but it didn't improve Henry's temper. He bumped the coachers when they reached the end of the line, and again when he backed onto them for the return journey. He simmered angrily while the fireman fastened the coupling. No one noticed a rattle from beneath Henry's footplate as he snorted away, and soon the train was running well. "Hurry, hurry, hurry," puffed Henry. Faster and faster they went. At last Henry began to feel better. Suddenly he heard a crack from below his cab. "Look out!" shouted the driver. He applied the brakes while the fireman scrambled forward to the footplate. He was just in time. Both men watched in horror as a widening gap opened between Henry and his tender. Henry stopped as soon as he could. The automatic brake halted his tender, and the train some way behind. "We must drop Henry's fire," said the driver urgently. "It will be dangerous to let him boil dry, now that we can't get more water from the tender." The fireman agreed. "Sorry, old boy," he said to Henry, "just when we got it going nicely too. But if you hadn't banged about so much, it wouldn't have broken your tender coupling." While the fireman dealt with the fire, the driver went back to tell the signalman what had happened. When he returned, he found Henry completely hidden in a huge cloud of black smoke, which billowed out from underneath his cab. The fireman emerged, choking. "Henry's fire set the sleepers alight," he spluttered. "You stay here. I'm going to telephone the fire brigade." The driver eased Henry clear of the blaze, and then Edward came to take his train. Henry felt most uncomfortable. Workmen made Henry a temporary coupling. They rejoined him to his tender, and then the driver and the fireman lit a new fire and drove him gently home. Edward, who had of course seen everything, told the others. They were careful what they talked about in the shed that night. First, Henry was touchy on the subject of fires for some time afterwards, but James was quick to notice that from then on Henry stopped making rude remarks about the colour of fire engines. Deep freeze. Winter had come, and for many days now had held everything in its icy grip. The countryside was frozen hard. Trees were white with frost, and icicles hung from bridges and water columns. Luckily, however, there was little snow. "Too cold for that, thank goodness," shivered James's driver, as he and the fireman huddled on the sheltered side of the cab. James had an open footplate, and every day his crew came to work muffled to the eyebrows in scarves and jerseys. Sometimes water columns froze too, and then the engines could not get the water they needed. But this never happened at the workstation, and one day when the frost seemed harder than ever, James's driver stopped him by the water column there. "We'll give you a good topping up while we can," he said. "There's no telling when we might get some more." James shivered as the icy water cascaded into his tender, but he knew his driver was right. He filled James's tank to the brim. Because the fireman forgot to tell the driver to turn the tap off, water overflowed onto James's tender, making him start to shiver again. "Right," said the fireman, jumping down the footplate. "Let's be off. I want to warm myself up shoveling coal." "We can't go yet," laughed the driver. "They haven't finished loading the luggage van." "Well, I wish they'd hurry," grumbled the fireman, blowing on his hands. "I'm frozen from standing on that tender." All engines have a tap called an injector. It allows the driver or the fireman to transfer water from the tender to the boiler and is very important. Without it, the water level in the boiler could become too low to make steam properly. They had not gone far before James felt thirsty again. "I need a drink, please," he said to his driver. The driver switched on the injector, but nothing happened. The fireman tried his duplicate, but still nothing. "I've got such a pain," groaned James. "Our injectors failed," said the driver. "Blockage in the pipe most likely. We'll have to stop and deal with your fire. Can't go on without any water." "Don't set the sleepers on fire," pleaded James. "Henry would never let me forget it." The fireman laughed. "You'll be all right if we just damp you down," he said. "There's no need to throw the fire out as Henry did." They stopped near a signal box, and James's driver asked the signalman to telephone for help. The works sent a diesel, whom James had never met, to help him. "Rescue by a diesel," he snorted disgustedly. "It's degrading. I won't go." But he soon changed his mind, because now that his fire was down, his boiler was cooling, and he could feel the icy wind. The diesel was friendly. James was quiet at first, but by the time they reached the works, the diesel had won him over, and the two of them were chatting like old friends. At the works, James's fireman climbed onto the tender. He tried to open the filler cap, but he couldn't do it. "There's your answer, James," he said. "Your filler cap's frozen solid. That's because the water overflowed. Ice is stopping air from getting into the tank, so the injector can't work. You'll be all right when the ice melts." He was. And that wasn't all. Thanks to his new friend from the works, even James now admits that diesels can be useful engines too. Great little engines. Patience is a virtue. The Fin controller held a letter in his hand. 6 little engines watched him anxiously. "Do you remember your twin, Taliclin?" he asked Skarloey. "He is ill, so his controller is short of an engine. Now I can't spare anyone until Duke is mended, but I want to suggest to him that one of us might—" "Oh, sir, please, sir," cried the engines excitedly. The Fin controller held his ears. "You can't all go," he laughed. "I thought—" "Sir Handel." "Oh, sir," said Sir Handel happily. A few days later, Duke was taken to the works. Sir Handel's excitement grew and grew. "I hope he comes back quickly," he said to anyone who would listen. "Don't be so impatient," his driver laughed. "There's a lot to be done first. Your repairs took a long time, remember, and Duke is quite a bit older than you." The weeks passed, and still Duke didn't come back. Sir Handel became more and more impatient. One day he was waiting with some carriages at the bottom station, when Gordon arrived. "I've been invited to Wales," Sir Handel told him in an important tone of voice, "but I can't be spared until Duke is mended." "Quite right," said Gordon. "It's a great responsibility being indispensable." "Gordon says I'm insensible," Sir Handel boasted to the others. They were amused, but not impressed. Summer came, and crowds of visitors came to the railway. Sometimes extra coaches were needed to carry all the people. One day Sir Handel's train was fuller than ever. When he reached the top station, he was quite exhausted. An enormous crowd was waiting on the platform for the last train home. "They must have come on earlier trains and stayed to picnic by the lake," said the fireman. "Never mind, we'll manage all right. It's all downhill from here on." But at the station near the waterfall, the platform was full too. "We need a shoehorn to get them all in," exclaimed the guard, scratching his head. "Still, we'll have to do it somehow. Some of the passengers can travel with me in Beatrice." The passengers had enjoyed their day in the hills, and didn't mind standing if it meant that they could get home. They knew it would be for only a short while, and Sir Handel would try hard to get them to Henry on time. The guard always checked tickets at the station by the waterfall. Today it was a long job, and before he had even finished, Sir Handel was growing impatient. "An insensible engine like me shouldn't be kept waiting for Henry like this," he fumed to his driver. "Can't be helped," replied the driver. "Henry will just have to wait. He's kept us at it before now." At last the guard was ready. He blew his whistle, waved his green flag, and turned towards Beatrice. "At last we're off, do come along! At last we're off, do come along!" Sir Handel snorted impatiently. Quickly the train began to move. The guard tried to board Beatrice, but her doorway was blocked by passengers. By the time they had moved to let him in, the train was out of the station, and the guard was left on the platform, jumping up and down in frustration as the train chuffed quickly away. Beatrice tried to stop, but there was no one to put her brakes on. The guard blew his whistle and waved a red flag, but the line curved, and Sir Handel couldn't see or hear him. Luckily, one of the passengers knew what to do. He pressed a button, and a buzzer sounded in Sir Handel's cab. His driver braked hard, and Sir Handel ground to a halt. "Now what?" the driver asked the fireman. "Go and find out. Maybe we've left someone behind." They had, of course. They soon discovered who it was. Some passengers helped the guard to get aboard, and after a fast run, Sir Handel's train reached the terminus at the same time as Henry. Sir Handel stopped with a sigh of relief. The guard came along the platform to see him. "I'm sorry I was impatient, Mr. Guard," said Sir Handel nervously. "I didn't want to be late bringing Henry's passengers." "Insensible engines shouldn't be late, should they?" "No," agreed the guard, "but sensible engines know that patience is a virtue. Remember that next time." "I'll try," promised Sir Handel sadly. Peter Sam and the Prickly Problem. Duke returned at last, and Sir Handel went away. The other engines were kept so busy that they didn't have time to miss him. Hedge cutters had been busy too, trimming trees and bushes beside the railway so the passengers could see the view. Every evening Rusty took some trucks up the line and carried away as many cuttings as he could. But he could manage only a few at a time, and as fast as he moved the cuttings, more took their place. It was Peter Sam's turn to take the morning train. The coaches were full, but the rails were dry and Peter Sam didn't mind the extra load. He puffed happily along until just beyond the tunnel, he found that in the night a high wind had blown hedge cuttings across the rails. He stopped, and his driver and fireman got down. "We'll never get through that lot," exclaimed the fireman. "Pah!" scoffed Peter Sam. "They're only little branches. Nothing to it. We'll simply push them aside." "Have it your own way," said his driver. "If we stop to clear up properly, we shall be here for ages, and some of the passengers might miss their train at the bottom station." Peter Sam puffed bravely on. He went carefully at first, and the branches slid aside easily. Then came a stretch where the cuttings were brambles. Peter Sam began to regret his boasting. Not only were those thorns prickly, but they caught in each other, and the branches stayed firmly put. "Ouch!" exclaimed Peter Sam suddenly, and stopped. "I can't move," he complained. The fireman got out to check. "It's no good," he said at last. "You've got brambles caught in your valve gear, and steam can't get into your cylinders. We shall have to cut you out." Peter Sam shuddered. He shut his eyes and prepared for the worst. The fireman pulled on thick gloves. Then while he tried to clear what he could, the driver went to ask the guard if he had a knife. Some of the passengers had knives too and came to help, but even then the job took longer than expected, and by the time Peter Sam was free of brambles, there was no hope of getting the passengers round the lake before James's train left. Peter Sam's driver apologised to the passengers, but they didn't mind. "We enjoyed the adventure," they laughed. The driver telephoned the Finn controller. On the way home they passed Rusty pulling a long train of trucks. Rusty worked hard, and by the afternoon the line was clear for trains to run normally. Peter Sam's front felt uncomfortable for several days. The other engines laughed and teased him. "Take a snowplow next time," they suggested, and they kept asking if he had a sharp knife in his cab. At last Skarloey told them to stop. "I really can't think what all the fuss is for," remarked Duncan innocently. "They were only little branches after all. Nothing to get prickly about, surely." Special. During the summer, a party of scouts set up tents in a field beside the line. They bustled about arranging things, but were never too busy to wave to the engines as they passed. "They've come for their annual camp," explained Duncan's driver. "It's a sort of holiday for them. Their leader has been to see Mr. Hugh, and he says that the boys can work on the railway for us." "Sounds a sort of funny holiday to me," said Duncan doubtfully. Lots of people do it, continued the driver. The Talyllyn Railway, where Sir Handel has gone, has most of its work done like that. The scouts are going to help us. You know that place near the top station where the ditches are bad and we have to be careful when it's wet? Well, the scouts are going to put that right for us. The engines were pleased because they didn't like having to slow down in wet or frosty weather. It was anything but frosty at present. Each day the sun shone and it became hotter and hotter. Too even for holiday makers to lie on the beach. Each train was as full. The scouts were hot too. They rested thankfully as the trains passed, but their cheerful waves became wearier as the week wore on. On the final day of their camp, Duncan toiled uphill with the last train. He was looking forward to a rest under the trees at the top station. As Duncan neared the place where the scouts were working, he whistled to warn them that he was coming. Then he saw a figure crossing the line in front of the train. Duncan's driver put a hand on his brake. "Steady on, Duncan," he warned. "It looks as if the scouts' leader wants us to stop for something." Duncan drew gently to a halt, and the leader climbed onto the step of his cab. "Is anything wrong?" the driver asked anxiously. "Not yet," replied the leader, "but I'm afraid there might be unless the boys have a drink. Can you drop off some pop or something when you next pass, please?" "No problem," replied the driver. "I'll see the refreshment lady when we reach the top station." When they got there, the driver came back from the refreshment room with a long face. "Not a bottle to be had," he moaned to Duncan. "Everyone's as thirsty as those boys, so now what?" Duncan didn't know. He fought so hard that he began to feel thirsty himself. Then suddenly an idea came to him. "Isn't there a shop near the station by the lake?" he said. "Perhaps the lady there—" "Of course," interrupted the fireman excitedly. "We'll leave the coaches here while Duncan takes something to the boys. We can just get back here before the train is due to leave, but we must hurry." While the station master telephoned the shop lady to warn her they were coming, Duncan set off. The shop lady met them at the station. "I haven't much myself," she said, "but the lads are welcome to what there is." Little later, scouts heard a whistle, and Duncan puffed into sight. He stopped beside them, and his driver handed down the drinks. The scouts cheered him. "Not me," he told them. "It was Duncan's idea," though they cheered again. Thanked Duncan instead. "It's nothing," he said modestly. "You're helping us, and it's only fair that we should help you too." Sir Handel comes home. Sir Handel was given a great welcome when he returned. It was too late for the workmen to unload him that night, so the engines asked if his truck could be put where he could tell them all about his exciting adventures. "A real prince and princess came to see us," Sir Handel told them proudly. "They rode in a special train. Driver said they were given some books about us written by someone called the Thin Clergyman, but I didn't really understand that." "I do," said Duke. "He and the Fat Clergyman were the ones who found me, and they put me in a book too." Peter Sam was impressed. "Did you pull the prince's train?" he asked Sir Handel. "No," replied Sir Handel. "I was a spare engine. Poured with rain and I got soaked. I pulled a special wedding train though. We had to bring the coaches back very early in the morning. I'd never been out at that time of day before." Peter Sam told Sir Handel about his tangle with the brambles. Sir Handel laughed. "I know what you mean," he said. "I had an adventure a bit like that just before I came back. It was a wet day and I didn't want to go out, but the driver said I must. Well, we set off. Luckily the train wasn't very full. We got on all right, even though it was raining. Then we stopped at a station." Sir Handel paused dramatically. "Go on," urged Peter Sam. "Just beyond the station," continued Sir Handel, "there was a steep bit and a curve. Well, it was wet, so naturally I was concentrating on getting up the hill." "Of course," agreed Rheneas gravely. "As we came round the bend, a tree suddenly seemed to jump out at me. I tried to stop, of course, but my wheel slipped on the wet rails, and I ran smack into the tree. It hurt, I can tell you." "Oh, it must have done," agreed Duke, and there were sympathetic murmurs from the others. "The tree didn't actually hit me in the eye," explained Sir Handel, "but the driver and the fireman made a great fuss about it. Next morning they put a bandage on my forehead and a black patch over my eye. Everyone laughed and said I looked like a pirate. Then I pulled a special train at a thing they called an AGM. They even wrote a piece about me in their magazine." Sir Handel sighed happily. "Oh, it was great fun," he said. "Did you see my twin Taliclin?" asked Skarloey. "He was in another part of the shed," replied Sir Handel. "The other engines told me that he's on the mend, and he'll be back at work soon. He's lucky. He's got a lovely railway." Sir Handel closed his eyes, remembering. "All the same," he added, "it's good to be home." Duke smiled in the darkness. "I know what you mean," he agreed. More about Thomas the Tank Engine. Thomas, Percy and the Coal. Thomas the Tank Engine's blue paint sparkled in the sunshine as he puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. "Blue is the only proper colour for an engine," he boasted to the other engines. "Oh, I don't know. I like my brown paint," said Toby. "I've always been green. I wouldn't want to be any other colour either," added Percy. "Well, blue is the only colour for a really useful engine. Everybody knows that," spluttered Thomas. Percy said no more. He just grinned at Toby and winked. Each day Percy brings a truck full of coal from the junction for the coal merchants at Farquhar. The next morning Thomas was resting when Percy arrived. "Be careful in the siding, Percy," warned Thomas as Percy pushed the trucks along the line beside him. "Those buffers aren't very safe, they—" He got no further, as one of the coal trucks passed Thomas, the catch on it burst open. With a rumble and a crash, an avalanche of coal poured out and piled up around Thomas's wheels. A thick cloud of coal dust arose all around him. "Achoo!" spluttered Thomas. "Help! I'm choking! Get me out!" Percy looked worried. Then as the dust settled, he looked at Thomas and began to laugh. Thomas's smart blue paint was black from his smoke box to his bunker. "Ha ha ha ha!" chuckled Percy. "You don't look really useful now. You should see yourself. You look really disgraceful." "I'm not disgraceful," choked Thomas furiously. "You did that on purpose, Percy. Now stop your stupid giggling and get me out." But it was some time before Percy could help. The coal bunker stood behind the buffers that Thomas had said were unsafe. It was only when the coal was shoved into the bunker that Thomas could be moved. Poor Thomas was filthy. "You're not fit to be seen," grumbled the cleaners. It took so long to clean Thomas that he wasn't ready in time for his next train, and Toby had to take Annie and Clarabelle with Henrietta. The cleaners were tired and dirty when they had finished. Thomas was grumpy in the shed that night. Toby thought it was a great joke. Percy was annoyed with Thomas for thinking that he had made his paint black on purpose. "Who'd have thought it?" Percy remarked. "Fancy a really useful blue engine like Thomas becoming a disgrace to the Fat Controller's railway." "You wait, Percy," replied Thomas crossly. "One day you'll laugh on the other side of your smoke box." "Pah!" rejoined Percy. "I wouldn't have missed all that fun for anything." The feud worsened as time went on. Thomas thought Percy had coal-dusted him deliberately, and Percy was cross with Thomas for thinking so. 2 days later, Thomas was at the platform and Percy bought his trucks from the junction. Percy arranged them and ran into a siding for a drink before Thomas's train left. The water column stood at the end of the siding with the faulty buffers. As Percy tried to stop, he heard a cracking sound. To his horror, found that he couldn't. The buffers didn't stop him either. "Oh!" wailed Percy. "Help!" The buffers broke and Percy ran into the coal bunker with a thud. Coal flew everywhere, and when the dust had settled, Percy had disappeared beneath a thick black cloak. Thomas watched from the platform. As the crash died away, the signal arm dropped and Thomas moved off, laughing as he went. Percy was furious, and he spent the rest of the day wondering how to pay Thomas back. The Runaway. Percy was soon mended, but one morning Thomas woke feeling ill. The Fat Controller sent him to the big station to see if he could be mended there, but it was no use. "Edward must take you to the works," the Fat Controller told him. "I want you to go and help Percy and Toby while Thomas is ill," he said to Duck. "Donald and Douglas will do your work here until Thomas is well enough to come back." Duck was delighted. He knew Percy already, and it wasn't long before he had made friends with Toby, Terence and Bertie. Percy, who was still cross with Thomas over the coal dusting incident, was glad to have someone new to talk to. Even Annie and Clarabel were impressed. Such nice manners, they told each other. It really is a pleasure to go out with him. He soon made Duck feel welcome, and he laughed when they told him how Thomas had once left their guard behind at the junction. When Thomas came back, Annie and Clarabel told him how well Duck had managed. Though Thomas was jealous at first, he was so pleased to be home that he soon forgot. But he didn't forget the affair with the coal. Percy was careful to keep out of his way. The works had left Thomas's handbrake very stiff. It made his brakes seem if they were on, when in fact they weren't, and Thomas's driver and fireman soon learned to be extra careful. But one day Thomas's fireman was ill, and a relief man took his place. At the junction, Thomas ran round Annie and Clarabel. While his driver chatted to the station master, the fireman fastened the coupling. The driver had told the relief fireman about Thomas's brake, but unluckily he had forgotten. When he had finished with the coupling, he joined the driver and station master on the platform. Thomas simmered happily. Not long now, he thought. In the distance, Henry appeared. At that moment, Thomas felt his wheels begin to move. He tried to stop, but he couldn't without his driver and fireman. He tried to whistle a warning, but he couldn't do that either. The guard shouted from the platform, but that did no good. The guard, driver and fireman were all stranded, and the passengers were left on the platform staring. Thomas, Annie and Clarabel gathered speed out of the station. The empty coaches shrieked as they rounded the curve, but Thomas, with plenty of steam, kept on going. The signalman at the junction soon realised what had happened, and sent a message along the line. An inspector prepared to stop the runaway at the station near the airfield where Harold the helicopter stood in case of an emergency. But Thomas was still going much too fast. Quickly the inspector climbed aboard Harold and they took off. "I must get there in time, I must," he whirred anxiously. Below, Thomas was tiring. I need to stop, he panted wearily. Annie and Clarabel held back as they went uphill. As they neared the next station, Thomas saw Harold land, and the inspector ran towards the platform where he stood waiting. This time, Thomas entered the station slowly enough for the inspector to act. Running beside the train, he judged his moment, jumped, and scrambled into Thomas's cab. Then he put the brake hard on. With a sigh of relief, Thomas stopped. The inspector mopped his brow. "Phew," he remarked. Wearily, Thomas agreed with him. Better late than never. Workmen were mending the viaduct on the main line. The arches needed to be strengthened, but the Fat Controller did not want to close the railway while the work was done, and so repairs took a long time. The engines had to take great care when crossing the viaduct, and the delay often made them late at the junction. Thomas was cross. "Time's time," he grumbled. "Why should I keep my passengers waiting while Henry and James dawdle about all day on viaducts?" "Don't blame me," snorted Henry one day. "If we hurried across the viaduct it might collapse, and then you'd have no passengers at all. What would you do then, eh?" "Run my train on time for one thing," retorted Thomas, and hurried away before Henry could answer. At the top station, Bertie was timed to arrive just after Thomas. His passengers soon found that instead of going straight from Bertie to their train, they were having to wait until Thomas arrived. "Late again," remarked Bertie one day, as Thomas panted wearily in, 10 minutes after time. "I thought you could go fast, Thomas. It's time we had another race. I reckon I could beat you now." Thomas went redder than ever and let off steam loudly. "Rubbish!" he hissed fiercely. "I'd still beat you any day. It's those main-line engines. They dither about on their viaduct and then blame the Fat Controller's workmen. It's just an excuse for laziness if you ask me." One day James was later than ever at the junction. "I'm sorry, Thomas," he puffed as he came breathlessly onto the platform. "I was held up at the big station, and the viaduct made it worse." "It's lucky for you I'm a guaranteed connection," snorted Thomas. He puffed importantly away, leaving James at a loss for words. Peep, peep, whistled Thomas at every station. Get in quickly, please. The passengers did their best, but Thomas soon found that he couldn't save much time. As they neared the tunnel, Thomas thought he saw a flash of red on the road beside the line. That looks like Bertie, he said to himself, but Bertie should have got to Farquhar ages ago. It was Bertie. Thomas stopped nearby and asked what the matter was. I feel dreadful, mourned Bertie, all upset inside. Driver says he can't make me better. Thank goodness you're late. Can you take my passengers, please? They'll never get home otherwise. Of course, agreed Thomas. Thankfully, the passengers climbed into Annie and Clarabel, and after promising Bertie that he would be sent for help from the next station, Thomas set off again. Already he was feeling much more cheerful. All the passengers reached home safely, and when Bertie was better, he came to thank Thomas. I'm sorry I teased you about being late, he said. That's all right, said Thomas. I'm glad I could help. Perhaps being late isn't such a bad thing after all. Drip tank. One evening, Percy was bringing empty stone trucks from the harbour. He was tired of his quarrel with Thomas and wanted to be friends again. He had had a good day and was feeling extra pleased with himself. He was so busy thinking how he would tell Thomas and Toby about his expert handling of the trucks that he forgot to keep a good lookout. Too late, he saw a broken branch hanging over the line straight in front of him. Ow! He groaned. He tried to stop, but his brakes wouldn't let him. Ouch! He exclaimed a moment later. The branch hit his smoke box, broke away and crashed to the ground. Percy was more startled than hurt, but his front was still sore when he reached the shed. It's your own fault, said Thomas unsympathetically. You should keep a better lookout. I've no patience with you. Ah! Retorted Percy huffily. He forgot his good resolution and talked to Toby for the rest of the evening. Percy didn't speak to Thomas the next day either. I say, Toby, he said in the shed that evening, what's a drip? Do you know? Toby pondered. It's when rain comes through a hole in your cab, and fireman hasn't got time to mend it, he decided at last. That's silly, objected Percy. I heard a boy on the platform call his friend one this afternoon. I'm sure he couldn't have come through a hole in my cab, he added earnestly. Thomas was tired of being ignored. That's different, he interrupted loftily. The boy just thought his friend was being a coward, or silly, or a spoilsport. Percy thought about this. So he suggested reflectively, if you stopped me from doing something nice, would you be a drip, Thomas? You're the drip, answered Thomas crossly. Now go to sleep like a sensible engine and stop talking nonsense. Percy was offended. Instead of going to sleep, he became even more determined to pay Thomas out. Next day, Henry's train was late at the junction. When Thomas set out along the valley, he was trying to make up for lost time. Suddenly there was a loud bang, and something hard hit the bottom of his left-hand water tank. Ouch! Exclaimed Thomas, and he stopped. As he did so, he felt water splashing cold against his wheels. One of your side rods has broken, said his driver. It swung up and punctured your tank. We'll have to get help. At Farquhar, Percy was shunting. The station master came up. Leave those trucks, please, Percy, he said. Thomas has got a hole in his water tank. There's water dripping everywhere, and he can't get home on his own. Percy was still cross with Thomas. I won't go, he said. Thomas called me a drip. Let him jolly well stay there and drip himself. But what about Annie and Clarabel and the passengers? Reminded Percy's driver. They deserve to stay out all night too. Percy was sorry at once. Oh, I forgot them, he said. We must rescue them in case they turn into drips too. He hurried away. He found Thomas near the river. Everyone was glad to see him, and the passengers thanked him for coming. I'm sorry I was rude, said Thomas as Percy helped him back to the shed. That tank of mine turned me into a bigger drip than we expected, didn't it? Can we be friends again? Please? Percy was delighted to agree.